So let's talk a little about fatalism, a philosophical position that suggests the subservience of all activities and happenings to fate. Fatalism generally refers to any of the following ideas: the view that we are powerless to do anything other than what we actually do. Included in this is that man has no power to influence the future, or indeed his own actions. An attitude of resignation in the face of some future event or events which are thought to be inevitable. That acceptance is appropriate rather than resistance against inevitability. So these ideas are closely related to determinism and defeatism, which are mindsets that are associated with pessimism and cynicism, which are indicative of grounded positions rooted in the dark spectrum of ill psychologies. And right out of the box, we can see why these presuppositions appeal to the average sardonic man. It relieves him of all responsibility, makes him feel less emasculated by his own disempowered disposition, enables the pathos of his hapless condition, and helps him feel less guilty about his own inaction, apathy, and any possible immoral behaviors. Assuming that he has a shred of conscience that causes self-reflection and recapitulation, it's not safe to assume that. This is a very degenerative state of existence for a human being to resign himself to. It's basically throwing in the towel and giving up. It is often a position that develops as a result of a long journey into the depths of the external, which will always, without exception, conclude with disappointment and failure to assuage the common anxieties that plague the modern man. Indeed, so many of us are like hungry ghosts, wandering around in vain, searching longingly for something to fulfill our desperation. And we can just imagine how the hungry ghost's search will turn out. For there is nothing found externally that will ever bring it lasting peace. But, in a way, the fatalist is right. With this mindset and attitude, and the refusal to investigate and probe deeper into the introspective source, fate will command your path. For those that are content to hit the cruise control and ride their existential agency out on autopilot, your course will be ruled by destiny, no question about it. But for those who have done a little deeper experimentation and investigation into the source of awareness, the only factor that cannot be disputed, due to the discernible empirical first-hand self-evidence of such, these suggestions are utter nonsense, an irresponsible dereliction. We are powerless to do anything other than what we actually do. What is that? Does this actually mean anything? Or is this just a hungry ghost moaning about his bleak plight? What else would you hope to do other than what you can actually do? Maybe you are getting caught up on the inference of the concept of actuality, of which is comparable to defining one's limits and possibilities to a shackle around one's ankle. What is actual is that you are aware of an experience of a reality. Beyond that, anything else proposed will either contribute to weighing you down or will serve to facilitate your freedom from self-imposed limitations. It's as simple as that. So much of how everything is assembled is arranged so to fortify your disempowerment. And at the core of this marginalization is the dictating narrator, the constant chatter of the thinking mind, which reinforces the disempowerment by continually sustaining it through stubborn attachment to dogmatic narrative, external verification substantiated by way of reflective aspects, and validation via confirmation bias. All of this gives the impression that the restricting parameters are not the result of self-imposed limitations, but are, in fact, the unbendable laws that no one has a choice but to abide. And of course, this assumed setup fits well with most people's predilection. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a cycle that eventually reinforces itself with little or no provocation. The notion that you are powerless to do anything other than what you can actually do in itself is self-defeatism, for it helps to revert the awareness into conformity to the idea of powerlessness as the accepted normative condition, while promoting the idea of the severe limitation of the existential agency, casting a cloud of weakness and hence distrust and disdain to the very aspect that is most sure, most immediate, and most self-evident. With this as a mindset, which we can liken to a harnessed horse with blinders, what kind of conclusion about reality will be realized that isn't in deference to some sort of extrinsic phenomena? This is the conditioning that must be unlearned in order to take responsibility and command your reality. Things are not as solid, fixed, and rigid as we fancy them to be. Anything and everything in your idea of an outer space contextualization was originally sourced from a superpositional potentiality. There is no such thing as actual phenomenal content. For anything manifested, whether it be an object, a force, a law, or a material phenomena, is empty, unsubstantial, transient, and impermanent. Increased lucidity reveals the hidden designs of these projections as sourced from pure potential, which is the foundation of physics and the source of all manifestations. And pure potential doesn't follow any rules. It produces rules. Pure potential isn't bound to anything as limited and contextual as determinism. If determinism does have any role as a factor in a produced reality, then it is only as a supportive role, conditional to and framed within a manifestation with borders, of which is rooted in pure potential, which is limitless, undefinable, immeasurable, and ineffable. We can become powerful when we position ourselves to be unbounded by actuality. This requires meta-awareness and detachment from identification with the persona, which cannot influence the future or even its own actions due to being immersed in disempowerment. Indeed, only those whose minds are untethered from the rigid confines of the worldly ego can influence the conditions of the present moment, which is all there really is in truth. The ideas of past and future being only illusory concepts with no basis in reality, which is the false premise upon which the idea of determinism is constructed. And of course, the untethered awareness can also influence the actions of the persona, which is afforded to those who are not slaves to the impulses, desires, and visceral demands of the physicality. Without this, it's understandable why an ego would resign itself to the idea of an inevitable future, for it is powerless in this state of being, and with this program as its conditioning, resignation does seem like the appropriate response, because mere thoughts and actions performed by a world-based persona are not gonna make any difference. Yet, on sort of a side note, if we consider pure potentiality, in a sense, the fundamental essence could be said to be both eternally always so in superposition, yet deterministic, for the oneness of all that is, while non-committed and free of all qualities, is always as such, determinedly so. And the cosmic maya of time, change, development, condition, and circumstance, while of illusion, are at the same time, as illusion, equally forever present, never created nor destroyed, perpetually happening instantly and simultaneously. But this is a bit tangential to the specific matter of a persona in delusion struggling with paradoxical absurdity. But it does highlight that illusion does have both the qualities of determinism and free will, but much of it will depend on whether the mind is over the matter or the matter is above the mind. When the matter is over the mind, the persona will be at the mercy of fate, as it is identifying with illusion instead of knowing itself as the source of awareness, and as such will be subject to conditions, which are bound to a cause, and causes under these conditions are tied up in dependent origination. Bringing the mind over matter is to break these rules, much as a hacker can compromise a program. And this leads to the wisdom of knowing that, as lucidity reveals, that illusion is a production of the mind, and as such, ironically, there is nothing to change, nothing to command, nothing to gain, and nothing to fix. For what good does it do to tinker with an illusion if one is already awake and aware that it is the source of these illusions, which only beg to be changed, commanded, gained, or fixed when one is in delusion? But if you are not of the mind to take responsibility for reality, and are resigned to let illusion steer the fate of your ego, then also in this case there is nothing for you to do about it. And while this buries one deeper in illusion and makes it much harder to self-recognize, perhaps it can reveal the flaw in the fatalistic reasoning. It's called the idol argument, which states that if something is fated, then it would be pointless or futile to make any effort to bring it about. So why not just be idle instead? The points of the argument are stated as follows. If it is fated for you to recover from an illness, then you will recover whether you call a doctor or not. Likewise, if you are fated not to recover, you will not do so whether you call a doctor or not. But either it is fated that you will recover from this illness, or it is fated that you will not recover. Therefore, it is futile to consult a doctor. Indeed, if you are resigned to fatalism and a deterministic belief system, then really, there is no reason for you to do anything at all. For whatever it is that you do or don't do is already determined. And since it's already determined, there isn't a choice to make, a causal action to perform, an effect to influence, nor any conditions to change, unto yourself, others, or to the world. So you might as well stay in bed all day, and don't worry. If you do, it was already determined to be that way by fate. So does this really seem like a sound philosophy, or just an elaborate device designed as an excuse to not do anything? Or if one does something, to not take any responsibility for doing it, or not doing it, as the case may be. But what about logical fatalism and the argument from bivalence? Well, these are very antiquated arguments, and not that difficult to pick apart, due to being based on weak, limited tools of reasoning. Logic does have its application, but it is hardly an all-encompassing be-all and end-all, believe it or not. The key idea of logical fatalism is that there is a body of true propositions, statements, about what is going to happen, and these are true regardless of when they are made. So, for example, if it is true today that tomorrow there will be a baseball game, then there cannot fail to be a baseball game tomorrow, since otherwise it would not be true today that a baseball game will take place tomorrow. What if the baseball game gets rained out? Then what? Then what was true today fails to be true tomorrow due to an unforeseen factor. Furthermore, to suppose that there is a body of predetermined true propositions fails due to indefiniteness and the lack of identification of the agency where these propositions are given context of truth outside of the subject that is asserting such presuppositions. Through logic, one may assign a truth value to a proposition before something is shown to be true or not, but one cannot assign a definite one. How could that be justified? I hate to say it, but much of these notions of predetermination, destiny, and absolute truth value stink of theological concepts. Logical fatalism assumes a perennial set of all propositions which exist without being proposed by anyone in particular, and for that reason alone are incompatible with logic. Where are these predetermined definite predictions assembled? Predetermined by what? By whom? Where are they located? When were they made? How were they determined? Why are they predicted as such? If you want to assert the pre-existence of truth in the future, then you need some basis to substantiate it. And so, on what are you substantiating it upon? Pre-existence of truth in regards to what? What is it pre-existing exactly? Relative to what? Pre-existing to the subject that makes all this shit up? Yeah, of course. That's always the underlying motive, isn't it? If there really is pre-existing truth out there, independent of the ones who define it, then this begs for explanation. By explaining that it is the objective configuration of a material universe doesn't explain one damn thing, since you cannot substantiate the context and origination of this so-called universe. We assume a universe exists because we experience it. Well, then it sounds like the only thing that you can really be sure of, at the very least, is that you have an awareness of appearances. Beyond that, you don't really know jack shit. You are just telling stories about appearances. Not much different than theology. So predetermined truth exists independently of the very thing that provides you with the ability to determine a truth? Fascinating. And I suppose the universe has its own story, independent of the one who is telling the story about it, right? This universe does seem like a great mythology. But if you want to push the truth of its independent existence, then authenticate that it is independent, please. Oh, right, you can't do that. So then this whole idea ceases to be logical determinism, because it is depending on fallacious arguments. And what good is logic if it is only a tool of an inconsequential subject that is a byproduct of something that exists independently of it? Doesn't really sound all that great of a tool at all. I'd prefer a tool that exists independently of me. I think it might be somehow more reliable, since it's a tool that cannot be crafted by my own bias. Sounds handy. Then there is the so-called principle of bivalence. The idea that propositions, that is to say, statements of opinions or value judgments, can be either true or false. One or the other, absolutely, with no in-between. Which is a silly proposition in itself. Here are some statements that can be either true or false. Pepperoni pizza is the best type of pizza when seasoned with garlic. Irishmen that own lawnmowers don't drink alcohol. Dogs with leather collars chase squirrels. It is not certain whether or not a healthy diet will result in weight loss. Should I continue? This principle is just another tired presupposition of objectivity and absolutism, which is attempting to establish these theories as default axioms. If demonstrating how it's not accurate to say that a proposition can be either true or false due to ambiguity, uncertain variables, and the indeterminate nature of a future truth is in discord with classical logic, then logic really is a weak tool with very limited application. I will further deconstruct logic in a future video. But for now, I'll wrap this up by pointing out that so much of the motives behind fatalism, as is also the case with most philosophies, ideologies, theologies, and mythologies out there, involve the usual attempt to dismiss the interconnectivity of reality with the mind, and to keep the externalized monkey in the mirror syndrome conditioning intact. It's rarely ever just said outright, for they don't even want to draw attention to it by even mentioning it. But instead, it is indirectly implied through various elaborate philosophical confections, complex mathematical equations, intriguing scientific postulations, cloak and dagger conspiracy theories, and fantastical theological allegorical parables. Yes, there are many different fashions of distractions and diversions, but all of them share in common the aim to misdirect the attention away from itself and to fixate on the perceptibles, all of which serve to reinforce the conditioning of the disempowered mind that is in self-imposed submission to matter. Will you take the necessary steps to examine this condition, discover its secrets, and free yourself? Or will you simply become a modern-day fatalist, resigned to a destiny that is out of your hands, living a life of a hungry ghost, stuck in a medium of predetermined, stifled, helpless desperation? Make a decision.